Little Women, Chapter 16, Surprises. Joe was alone in the twilight, lying on the old sofa, looking at the fire and thinking. Her face looked tired and rather sad, for tomorrow was her birthday, and she was thinking how old she was getting. Almost 25, and nothing to show for it. An old maid, she said to herself. That's what I'm to be. A literary spinster, with a pen for a husband and a family of stories for children. Suddenly, Laurie's ghost seemed to stand over her. It was too real to be a ghost. Oh my, Laurie! Dear Joe, you are glad to see me then. Glad? Of course. And where's Amy? Your mother has got her down at Meg's. We stopped there by the way, and there was no getting my wife out of their clutches. Your what? Cried Joe. You've gone and got married? Don't I look like a married man? Not a bit, and you never will. Why didn't you let us know? We wanted to surprise you. That you have. I sincerely congratulate you, for now, after all, you really are my brother. The next day on her birthday, a sudden sense of loneliness came over Joe, in spite of her family celebrating the day with her. But then there came a knock at the porch door. She opened it and started as if another ghost had come to surprise her, for there stood a tall, bearded gentleman, beaming on her from the darkness. Oh, Mr. Bear, I am so glad to see you. And I to see you, Miss March. But no, you have a party. And the professor paused as the sound of voices and the tap of dancing feet came down to them. No, we haven't. Only the family. My sister and friends have just come, and we are all very happy. Come in, make one of us. If I shall not be Mr. Too Many, I will so gladly see them all. You have been ill, my friend. Not ill, but sad. We have had trouble since I saw you last. Ah, yes, I know. My heart was sore for you when I heard that. And he shook hands again. When she brought him upstairs, she announced, Father, Mother, this is my friend, Professor Bear. He received a very kind welcome, and they liked him right away. By the end of the evening, even Laurie thought him the most delightful old fellow he ever met. Please remember, sir, said Laurie to him, that there is always a welcome waiting for you next door. The professor thanked him and then turned to Mrs. March and said, I must go, but I shall gladly come again if you will allow me, dear madam. A little business in the city will keep me here some days. He spoke to Mrs. March, but he looked at Joe, and the mother's voice gave as kind an invitation as did the daughter's eyes. When he had gone, Mr. March said, I suspect that he is a wise man. I know he is a good one, said Mrs. March. I thought you'd like him, said Joe. While Laurie and Amy were setting up house and planning their future, Mr. Bear and Joe were enjoying walks along muddy roads and soggy fields. By the second week, everyone knew perfectly well what was going on, yet everyone tried to look as if they were blind to the changes in Joe's face. They never asked why she sang about her work, did up her hair 3 times a day, and go so blushing red with her evening exercise of walks. And no one seemed to notice that Professor Bear, while talking philosophy with the father, was giving the daughter lessons in love. For 2 weeks, the professor came and went with lover-like regularity. Then he stayed away for 3 whole days and made no sign, which caused everybody to look serious, and Joe to become thoughtful at first, and then, alas, very cross. Disgusted, I dare say, said Joe to herself. It's nothing to me, of course, but I should think he would have come and bid us good-bye like a gentleman, she said to herself, as she put on her things for the customary walk one dull afternoon. You'd better take the umbrella, dear. It looks like rain, said her mother. Yes, Marmee. Do you want anything in town? I've got to run and get some paper. Mrs. March gave her a list of several items and said, If you happen to meet Mr. Bear, bring him home to tea. I quite long to see the dear man. While in the city, it started to rain, and she found she had forgotten the umbrella. With packages in her arms, she rushed across one street, narrowly escaping being run over by a cart. But in doing so, she stumbled into Mr. Bear. Who is this strong-minded lady who goes so bravely under many horse noses and so fast through much mud? He teased her. Then he noticed how wet she was and said, You have no umbrella. May I go with you and take you for the bundles? Take for you the bundles. Yes, thank you. She found herself walking arm in arm with her professor. his umbrella over her, but feeling as if the sun had suddenly burst out, that the world was all right again. "We thought you had gone," said Joe. "Did you believe that I should go with no farewell to those who have been so heavenly kind to me?" he asked. "No, I didn't. I knew you were busy about your business, but we rather missed you, Father and Mother especially." "And you?" "I'm always glad to see you, sir." "I thank you, and come one more time before I go. I have no longer business here. It is done. My friends find for me a place in college where I teach." "How splendid!" "Yes, but this place is at the West." "So far away?" "Miss March, I have a great favor to ask of you," began the professor. "Yes, sir?" "I am bold to say it in spite of the range, but because so short a time remains to me." "Yes, sir." "Heart's dearest, why do you cry?" "Because you are going away." "Ach, Mingo, that is so good," cried Mr. Bear. "Joe, I have nothing but much love to give you. I came to see if you care for it, and I waited to be sure that I was something more than a friend. Am I? Can you make a little place in your heart for old Fritz?" "Oh, yes," said Joe. The professor looked as if he had conquered a kingdom, while Joe trudged beside him in the rain, feeling as if her place had always been there. "What made you stay away so long?" she asked. "It was not easy, but I could not find the heart to take you from that so happy home until I could have a prospect of one to give you. After much time, perhaps, and hard work. How could I ask you to give up so much for a poor old fellow who has no fortune but a little learning?" "I'm glad you are poor. I couldn't bear a rich husband," said Joe. "And don't call yourself old. 40 is the prime of life." She kissed her Fritz under the umbrella. Then, turning from the night and storm and loneliness to the household light and warmth and peace awaiting them, with a glad welcome home, Joe led her friend in and shut the door. For a year, Joe and her professor worked and waited, hoped and loved, met occasionally and wrote many letters. The second year began, and Aunt March died suddenly. But when their first sorrow was over, for they loved the old lady in spite of her sharp tongue, they found she had left her immense house, lavish garden, and fruitful orchards to Joe, which made all sorts of joyful things possible. Joe announced, "I want to open a school there, a school for little lads, a happy, home-like school, with me to take care of them, and Fritz to teach them. Now, thanks to my good old aunt, we can live at Plumfield perfectly well if we have a school. It's just the place for boys." It was a very astonishing year altogether, for things seemed to happen in an unusually rapid and delightful manner. Almost before she knew where she was, Joe found herself married and settled at Plumfield. Then a family of 6 or 7 boys sprang up like mushrooms. It never was a fashionable school, and the professor did not get rich, but it was just what Joe intended it to be. And as the years went on, 2 little lads of her own came to increase her happiness, Rob and Teddy. There were a great many holidays at Plumfield, and one of the most delightful was the yearly apple picking. 5 years after Joe's wedding, one of these fruitful festivals occurred. Everybody was there, everybody laughed and sang, and everyone gave themselves up to the simple pleasures of the hour. Joe and Meg set forth the supper on the grass, for an outdoor tea was always the crowning joy of the day. The land literally flowed with milk and honey on such occasions. When no one could eat any more, the professor proposed the first toast. "Aunt March, God bless her." "Now, Marmy's 60th birthday. Long life to her, with 3 times 3. That was given with a will, and the cheering once begun, it was hard to stop, and everybody's health was proposed. After this, the boys dispersed for a final lark, leaving Mrs. March and her daughters under the festival tree. I don't think I ever ought to call myself Unlucky Joe again, when my greatest wish has been so beautifully gratified, said Mrs. Bear. And yet your life is very different from the one you pictured so long ago. Do you remember our castles in the air? Asked Amy. Yes, I remember, but the life I wanted then seems selfish to me now. I haven't given up the hope that I may write a good book yet, but I can wait. My castle was the most nearly realized of all. I asked for splendid things, but in my heart I knew I should be satisfied if I had a little home and John and some dear children like these. And Meg laid her hand on her tall boy's head with a face full of content. My castle is very different from what I planned, but I would not alter it, though like Joe, I don't relinquish all my artistic hopes, said Amy. Everyone can see that I'm far happier than I deserve, added Joe. I have nothing to complain of, and never was so jolly in my life. Yes, Joe, I think your harvest will be a good one, began Mrs. March. Not half so good as yours, Mother. Here it is, and we never can thank you enough for the patient sowing and reaping you have done, cried Joe. I hope there will be more wheat and fewer weeds every year, said Amy softly. Mrs. March could only stretch out her arms as if to gather children and grandchildren to herself and say, Oh, my girls, however long you may live, I never can wish you a greater happiness than this. Oh, ho, ho. Okay, back to the top. I think that was it. Nope, there it is. Amy, almost 25. Oh, no, Joe, almost 25 and nothing to show for it. An old maid. That's what they were called if they never got married or had children. They were just an old maid. So we're going to put this on Joe's slide. This is what she's thinking of herself. So this is interior monologue on her part. So we're going to need to stretch this text box and then add it here. And then come down. Lori and Amy were setting up house and planning their future. So that means they were getting their house together, putting in their furniture and their pictures. Let's see, let's look at Amy's. Oh yeah, we have room for action on hers, so we'll put that on hers. So stretch up this text box. And we'll add it here. So they're married now and getting their house ready. Mr. Bear and Joe are walking along the muddy fields. See if we have room on Joe's. We have a lot on hers. We might not. Maybe we should go put it on Mr. Bear's. Oh no, we can probably stick it there. I'm gonna come right here, and I'm gonna backspace once, and actually, you know what I can do too is I can stretch this box out just this way. That'll give us a little bit more room too. There we go. Perfect. So that will fit right in there. And then, do you remember our castles in the air? So this is a very good technique when writing a story, is to revisit something that was said earlier in the book where they talked about the castles. So they talked about it as young children, and now at the end of the story, you see where they are. Did their dreams come true? They did, really, but except they're really grandiose dreams of being a famous author or a famous musician or a famous artist. Those dreams at this point had not come true, but they certainly were happy, and they were married, and so they come to realize that those dreams were far more important than being famous and known for their talent. Now, this last line is very, very important. I hope there will be more wheat and fewer weeds every year, said Amy softly. We're going to put this on her interior monologue, even though she said it out loud. But what they were doing is they thanked Marmee. Thank you for patiently sowing and reaping, meaning Marmee planted the seeds of Meg, Joe, Beth, and Amy, and then she tended the crop. She tended the garden which means she took care of her girls as they grew up to be these very thoughtful and hardworking women. And so that was her harvest. So they're comparing their life to a farm. Plant the seeds, grow, harvest, and enjoy the food that you've made, just like we saw in the Pilgrim story. But now it's being applied to people. So she had these 4 children, she raised them, and they have beautiful lives. And so now what Amy says is, hopefully there will be more wheat, meaning that there will be more bountiful harvests, more good things will come in their lives, and fewer weeds. So you never want weeds in your garden. And weeds would be tragedy, like Beth dying and father having to go away to war for a long period of time. So those negative things would be the weeds, and the positive things would be the wheat. So it's a very fitting way to end this story. So we'll go back to Amy, and we'll put this on her monologue, interior monologue here. Drop it down to 10. Whoops, I always go one too many. Good job. That was a lot of work on that. We did a lot of analysis on all these characters. I think we got a little bit on everybody, didn't we? Oh, we never did anything with Belle Gardner, which is okay. She was more in the movie than she was in the book. So that's good to know. But that's okay. We don't need her.